Intricast.
Wondering what the F has happened to your body and your life? You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to Season 3 of Transforming 45, where we dive into the incredible stories of how brilliant humans are navigating the midlife squeeze with courage, passion, and a healthy dose of humor. Don't miss out on any of our heart-led episodes. Hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and if you're inspired, share an episode you love with a friend. It means more to me than I can express that you're choosing to spend time here and sharing our message of midlife revolution. So let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am really thrilled to have Michelle Brown with us. And she is and apparently Lola, my dog, also is joining in on the conversation. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you'll see that Michelle is actually here with me in the studio. I haven't had an in-person live person in quite some time, so this is really lovely.
Excited to meet that.
I'm glad to have you here. So Michelle is a mom of 3 young adults, an educator, and an author. She aspired to be a writer from a very young age. Michelle finds the creative outlet of writing combined with the weaving of storylines to be very uplifting and centering. Her debut novel, Love Always, did exactly that as she connected the true love story of her grandparents to the events of World War II and the resilience, strength, and determination of her grandmother to create a life for herself and her family. I just finished reading the book. It was really beautiful. And I am so glad that you are here. Welcome to the show today, Michelle.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Michelle and I actually met, years ago now, in my former incarnation when I was an educator in the public system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's really lovely to be having this conversation and a connection with someone else who's sort of walking a similar road.
That evolution.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in that vein, Michelle, tell us, who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
So I've given a lot of thought to that. And of course, I think who I am is a lot of different things. And certainly who I am right now is going to be very different in another few months, as you know, with the book and all these things that are happening. So this evolution, it just seems to be picking up some momentum. But I would say first and foremost, I'm just this very caring adult, right? Who is very interested in people's stories and how they connect, how we all connect through our stories. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I love writing so much, is because you have that opportunity to tell people's stories, you indirectly or directly. Doesn't matter whether, you know, you make the obvious ties to things or you kind of sneak them in there somewhere. But I think that we all have a story to tell. I just love being part of that. I love being able to share that. And I feel like I feel at my heart, I think I'm a storyteller, who I ultimately am. And, you know, being able to sort of tell my own story through that process as well. And sort of the evolution of sort of who I am and who I'm still becoming.
You know? Yeah, thank you for being so real and vulnerable about that, because sometimes people start with their roles that they play. Like they say, I am a writer, or I am I'm a this. And that is part definitely of who people are. But at our core, it's never a role.
No.
It's something, it is like the essence of who we truly are. And at the heart of this show, it's also storytelling, right? This is a storytelling show where people come and tell their stories. And there's so much midlife connection to not only you, but also your story, and a lot of matrilineal intergenerational trauma and healing, which I really want to get into with you.
Yeah.
But I also really wanted to thank you for writing this book, because when I was little, I wrote all the time. I wrote stories and everybody was like, Lisa, you're an author. And I have a story to tell, but every time I sit down to write it, I'm like, who cares about my story? It's just it's just a life. It's just my story. What makes it special or different? And in reading your story, I realized as humans, we just want to know about how other people walked on this earth.
Yeah.
And that's really what matters. So your book has given me a little bit of inspiration to get into actually doing the thing that I know that I'm supposed to do.
That's amazing. I love that.
So thank you for that.
Amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So really strong female characters are true in your life and also throughout the book. So I'm curious about how writing about those generations of women helped you in your own healing process.
So for the audience, the story itself is it's based on my grandparents and how they met and fell in love during the war, which is sort of a bit of a superficial piece of that story. But the deeper aspect is very much focused on my grandmother and how she was very young, very naive, and that process of realizing who you are and some of the experiences during war that change you at a molecular level. I think, some of the things that she experienced during war that, a lot of people would just completely crumble. And she truly was just this person who, all right, well, that happened. Now what? What am I going to do? Am I going to, and she used to say, never mind, eat your cake.
Right. Yeah.
This was something she actually honestly said was, never mind, eat your cake. You weren't eating cake. It was about, don't let those things that interrupt or try to interrupt who you are and what you're doing and your joy. Don't let those things do that. Eat your cake, enjoy your life, and be who you are. And when I was little, I always thought it was about cake.
Yeah, as we do when we're in the concrete stage of development. Yeah.
I genuinely thought, cake,
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I getting some cake? I was very distracted by that. But as I got older, I realized that, you just start to understand metaphors and things like that. And it was one of, when I talked to my aunts and uncles and things, and when they saw some of what we call the nanny-isms in the story, the phrases that she would often use, those really hit home for them because those are phrases that they grew up with as well. And it was truly her message. That was how she was, truly a person of, can you do anything about it? No? Then why are you wasting so much energy on it? You need to carry on. And being raised with that, and it wasn't an overt thing. Like, it was this subtle eat your cake stuff. It was just this role modeling that I didn't even realize was role modeling, and because she was just such a light-hearted person, and she just had this effervescence about her, and you didn't realize just how determined she was because she just did it. Spoiler alert, when my grandfather passes, she picks up and she carries on and reinvents herself and becomes this whole other person, or maybe who she was before my grandfather, like who, didn't really have those kinds of conversations per se. And I used to say, like, you never want to be with, find somebody else. She's like, why do I need to be bothered with some silly man in his socks? Picking up and fetching and caring for him,
Right.
Because in her mind, that's what the woman did. She didn't know that it could be different than that. So she surrounded herself with other really strong, amazing women. And it was just, as a young person watching that, thinking, wow, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
You can just be happy. Imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's especially in this midlife transition that we find ourselves in, that just being happy can feel a bit elusive because everything is in flux.
Yeah.
Right. It's a time where there are a lot of tectonic shifts that feel super overwhelming. And so now when you've got a little bit of time on the writing of the book,
Yeah.
and on some of your own journey,
Yes.
right? How do you see watching your grandmother live
Mm-hmm.
and make the decisions that she made? How do you see that playing out in your own story, and maybe like the way you're maybe disrupting some of that pattern?
I think some of that pattern comes from reinventing myself a couple of times now. So I came to education as probably like a third or a fourth career. So, you know, retirement age for me would be like 80 if I were to do full tilt on that. And that's not happening. Nobody wants me as a teacher at 80. I don't think that would be a good idea for anyone. But I think being able to allow myself to be like, yep, I liked that for a while and it fit a purpose. Now I'm ready for the next thing. And roll with that. And I genuinely feel like that was an impact. And being able to recognize and accept that my marriage was not something that worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that maybe I wasn't role modeling some of the things that I wanted to be role modeling. So making that decision to make that change
Mm-hmm.
and reinventing myself again and recognizing that I was a writer, despite the fact that I had been told I was not. Right? Growing up being told by many, many people, yes, you should do this. This is what you should do. This is what you should do. And then having that blip where someone told me that that wasn't what I was actually good at, and listening to it and forgetting who I was and my power and my abilities and my confidence and everything else. And I realized that I had changed in a way that I didn't appreciate, you know? And so making that change, disrupting a lot of things, and that was a very difficult situation. You know, I have 3 children, and it didn't just impact me; it impacted them, and impacted extended family. You know, and then deciding I'm going to write that damn book.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I was recording with another guest earlier today, and we were talking about this feeling of it being like coming back together with an old friend.
yes,
When you reunite with the person you were
yes.
before the world
Yep.
told you that you weren't
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so is that sort of similar to how it felt for you?
Yeah. I think the first time it genuinely felt like that, I was alone in the house. The kids still were living with me and stuff. I wasn't empty nested yet, because I'm just starting to experience that now. But I was alone in the house, and I was looking and I was thinking, oh, I want to repaint that brown I did. I don't like it. And realizing that a lot of the things that I had done in my house were things that I had done before, and it didn't reflect me and my taste. And I went, oh yeah, and I went out and I had that wall painted before my kids came home. And I thought, no. And that was when I really started to be like, oh yeah, this is my life. And realizing that having my life doesn't negate being a mom. It doesn't negate being a friend. It doesn't negate all of those other really incredibly important things to me. But it does allow me to be important too.
Yeah, which is a really key realization.
Yeah.
To know that, yeah, you get to be the starring character
Yeah.
in your own story. Yeah. It's one of my favorite. It's one of the reasons why that movie, The Holiday, is one of
Oh,
my absolute favorites. When I forget that actor's name, but he plays the writer. He's
oh,
the script writer in the movie, and he talks about like having chutzpah and being the leading lady in your own life. And when I heard that, I was like, "Why? Of course. Why do we cast ourselves as supporting characters? Because that's what we do."
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think societally, I do think that we are evolving that.
Mm-hmm.
I think our generation in particular is doing a particularly strong job of demonstrating that, role modeling that. My mom was a generation that was sort of the first to really be in the workplace fully, right? But
Mm-hmm.
my mom went back to work. I was only 3 weeks old. Like there wasn't mat leave and things like that, right? Because you were expected to stay home. You weren't supposed to come back to work.
Right.
So you don't need this mat leave stuff. Now you're married and having a kid, you should be home. But she had to go back to work. So, watching and learning, and her telling me, because she had grade 11, she didn't have university, and oh my gosh, and saying like, learn from my mistake. You will never waste education. Like I started off one direction and I ended up a different direction. Like it was this snoogly route to being a teacher, but along the way, I took courses and this and that and, different degrees and whatnot. And every time I sort of stopped and went, I'm not sure this is what I want to do, my mom would say, that's okay. Still education. You will never waste education. So I've tried to really instill that in my kids. I've also tried to really instill in my kids that this is your life, not mine. You need to find what fills your heart with what you want to do in life, and don't make backup plans. So my middle one, my daughter, wants to be an actress. And when she was about 15, she started talking about this backup plan. And I'm like, do you not want to be an actress anymore? She said, yeah. And I said, well, then why are you talking about this backup plan? She says, well, because it's going to be hard. I go, everything's hard. Everything's hard. And if you give up before you start, then you're probably not going to achieve that. So go for it or don't. It's up to you. Like, this is your life, but you need to go for it. Why would you not go for it? If this is what fills you, if this is what is you and all you want and consumes you, then you give it everything. Because don't make my mistake.
Right. Yeah.
So each generation, being able to pass on that next piece of that puzzle, right? So it'd be interesting to see what their puzzle.
Yeah, it is going to be very interesting. And I think you get to something really poignant around what is given from one generation to another, right? Because there is the hard, and then there is also the good and the learning. And I kept thinking about you as the writer, writing the story, but also it being very personal relationships for you.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give away too much that happens in the book, but there's some complexity that some people might be tempted to write in terms of black and white, good and bad.
Yes.
And I think it was very powerful, especially the way your grandmother played the role in acknowledging and accepting the complexity of choices and
I like how you're dancing around it.
Things. Well, I mean, like, if you're okay with it, okay. So, grandfather has a double life, right? Had a wife and family before going to the war. Meets your grandmother. Now, the relationship was not in a good place when he left with his wife, but had children. meets your grandmother, falls in love, does not tell her that there is another wife, that he's not divorced, and that he has children, and doesn't even tell her about his children until after they have children.
Yes.
Right. When they're coming back to Canada.
Yeah.
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 So it would be easy to characterize your grandfather as a really like as a terrible person, as a whatever adjective you want to use, man. And there was some real sensitivity and thoughtfulness around just the truth of human experience.
Yes.
Which is not, show me anyone who hasn't had something messy and complex.
Yeah.
And so how was that for you as both like writer and grandchild to like navigate that nuance?
So when I was doing my research, early on, I discovered all of that information, and my aunts and uncles did not know. So I was the bearer of that information to my family.
Can I ask a question? So in the book, your mom knew. Was that
my mom
true?
knew earlier? I don't know for sure exactly when she found out. So there's a lot of creative license there because I had to fill in some gaps. And I tried to fill them in a way that made sense to me, knowing what I knew about the people. And so I knew that my mom knew reasonably early on because my uncle found out after 9/11, he went to get his passport and could not because his birth certificate didn't have his Canadian father's name on it. So there were some complexities behind all of that.
Right.
And so that was when he found out truth, like the full truth. And he knew that my mom already knew because she already had her passport.
Right.
So, yeah. So there was something to that. But in doing that research and in discovering all of that information, I've also been able to connect with that other family and make that connection. And not everybody is open to everybody. And, full respect to whatever people are comfortable with, because that's not my place and that's not my story. Right. So, recognizing that people are comfortable with different things. I'm a much more open person than a lot of people, and I'm a much more accepting in that regard person. And so I've actually had the pleasure of meeting some of the other family and physically connecting with some of the other family. And my one cousin and I share this huge passion for history and things, so it's really interesting to meet and discover how much you have in common with people you didn't know you had in your family. So that's pretty exciting as well. But also trying to be incredibly sensitive to the fact that a lot of people were really hurt by things that happened. So
yeah. And in the book, you had a very strong connection with your grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah. So how did that? Did it evolve the way you saw him? Did it help you understand him in different ways that maybe you hadn't before, or did it have any impact at all?
When I initially found out some of his history, I didn't know. I knew some things before I knew about the family. I found out some things earlier on, and initially it did impact me. And then I started to realize that it didn't change anything because all of those things had happened. And I still had that relationship. So once I kind of wrapped my head around the fact that genuinely changes nothing. The only thing that it genuinely changed was if I could have possibly had more respect for my grandmother, I had more respect for my grandmother, having, knowing that she had to be so strong. But also understanding like women didn't have choice. Right. I mean, women weren't even allowed to have a bank account in Canada on their own until like 1974 or something crazy like that. Like I was like 6 years old.
Yeah.
Like, and my mother wouldn't have been allowed to own a house on her own and have a bank account on her own, which, now we think, what are you talking about? That's insanity. But that was the way of it. So for my grandmother, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You have 7 children.
Yes.
What are you going to do?
Yeah. I thought also the way you wrote their relationship, and the title of the book is Love Always, right?
Yes.
That especially during times of war. And that's what I kept thinking about, right? That even like, yes, he had a family prior to going to war, but that generation was so sandwiched between two very, very violent, very traumatic wars at a time when no one talked.
No. PTSD and all of those things.
No.
Yeah. Like you just manned up and you just, suck it up, all that kind of stuff, right? And women too, same thing.
Yeah.
You didn't talk about being unhappy because if you did, it's like, oh, well, everybody's unhappy. What are you talking? Like it was, it was very downplayed. Also, divorce just wasn't a thing either. Even if either of them could have attained that, it or asked for that or wanted that, it wouldn't have been something that would have been granted anyway, because the church was not in support of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And her great capacity for forgiveness also was, I think, for me, it felt like a really beautiful theme running throughout the book, in that, and yet she was able to see him for the truth of who he was.
Yes.
She didn't try to write a different story about him or create a different reality. She just was able to look at him with all of his flaws and within the social constructs that she had, make the decision of, I see you for the truth of who you are. I still love you for who I know that you are at your core. You've made some really shit decisions. and that is not the entirety of who you are.
Correct.
And
he evolves too.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the way he is with you in like that grandparent relationship.
Yeah.
It really shows what it takes to love another human being over long periods of time.
Yeah.
If that's the decision that you make.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. My relationship with my grandfather was one of just adoration, mutual, 100% mutual adoration. I could do no wrong, despite the fact that I was quite a brat, because I was so spoiled. And we lived with my grandparents, so and my aunts and uncles. So my aunts and uncles are more like brothers and sisters. Like we were a very close knit group. And so when he does pass, that piece of the story of me going, that's true. The true piece of the story.
Yeah.
So,
and that initial grief for that person. So in my life as well, my grandfather, my mom's dad, was, when I think of a strong like father-daughter relationship, he is the person I imagine in that role.
Yeah.
And I lost him at 19. So it was really, that was the first really like earth-shattering moment that I had.
Yeah.
And like, how do you think that relationship that you had with your grandfather ended up influencing the relationships you had with men in the rest of your life?
For me, as a young person, as a child, I gave no craps. I would outrun the boys. You can't keep up? Oh, well, and that's your problem. I'm not slowing myself down for you. And it wasn't until high school that I started realizing, boys don't like that. Right? Because that's, again, right, like sort of how we've been raised. And that's when that shift started of, okay, well, I won't dumb myself down, but I'll quiet myself down a bit. And I mean, there'll be people that'll be like, that was the quiet Michelle. Oh my God. Yes, it was. It was the quiet me. And that sort of that evolution of that shift of, you don't want to be in competition with your partner.
Mm.
And we're not. That's the thing. You're not. If you have the right partner, you're never in competition with your partner.
Mm-hmm.
But again, though, that role modeling that I had seen from my own mother, she was married 3 times, obviously not making great choices, and recognizing that. But when I was young, and those years immediately after my grandfather passing, I was fearless. I did whatever I wanted. You want to arm wrestle? Yeah, I'll beat you in arm wrestling, no problem. Whatever. You want to, British Bulldog? You want me on your team? Absolutely, we will win. Like that was the way it was, and it was just that slow devolving, I think, really, to be able to then turn around and start refinding who I was.
Yeah. Yeah. As I was listening to you talk, and I actually haven't thought about this in this way ever. And I haven't thought about that time around when my grandfather died for a very long time, because it was another time in my life where there was a lot of transition, because it was my first year of university.
Oh, yeah,
I'd been at school for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he passed away. I was in a relationship that I knew I shouldn't be in, but
it was comfortable.
Yeah. So, and there was like turmoil in that. And so there was a lot happening at that time, which kind of reminds me of what's happening in my life now in terms of just the like big shakeups that are happening. But I hadn't really put together when he was living, it was the same, where I felt like I could do anything. And he would have had my back no matter what. He was like a very stoic human, but I knew if anything, he would be there. And it was after he died that I lost some of that magic. And some of that like security and belief. And so I stayed in this relationship that I knew I should not be in, and lost huge parts of myself. That took a long time, and I hadn't really thought about that connection before. And that's why listening to and reading stories is so important. Because it gives you the opportunity to reflect on the experiences you've had, be them similar, be them completely different, and see the common themes and put some pieces together that maybe you wouldn't otherwise.
I was fortunate to my mom's second husband, who I refer to as my dad. It didn't matter that I was a girl. Girls can do whatever. He genuinely, if I said, can I do that? He'd be like, yeah, of course you can. Lots of things that I shouldn't, like cliff dive. But of course you can. And so that was what also helped bridge that for me when I lost my grandfather, and being the center of the universe for him, or feeling like I was, and having this other male who also was very, yes you can, and my mom saying, yes you can, and then just me kind of messing that up for a little while. And forgetting to listen to yes I can.
Yes. And it is those like that become painful spots though, right? That give us the opportunity to reflect and learn and pass that on to the next generation. It's where healing can actually come
absolutely
from. Yeah.
And I think too, like this book I've sat on this book for a ridiculously long length of time, like 20 years when I first started the book. And I do actually genuinely think that if I had written it then, it would have been okay. It would have been a good book. It would have been a good story. But I think having the broader experience of who I am now add to that, and the broader understanding of who these people are, and the broader experience of actually getting to know some of the other characters in the story has been able to afford me that opportunity to add so much more depth to the story itself. It was really hard to know what to keep in and what to leave out, because there's just so much that I could have shared. But the truth and reality is it's a book and you can only have so many pages and people can only read for so long.
Yeah.
So, you know, but yeah, there's so many more aspects and experiences and stories and things that I would have loved to have shared as well. But, you know, yeah.
So do you think those might turn into another book at another time, or
there's probably going to be, not that they're like spin-offs, they'll be solid individual books, but you will see the same characters.
Yeah. Because in a life, there are so many threads that weave together to create a tapestry.
Yeah.
Right. And when you're writing, you have to pick one to follow through.
Yeah.
And that's a really good reminder, because when you are reading the one thread, you do forget, right, about all the other threads that are at loose ends out here. So,
there could be 20 books just off of the characters within this book, but the next one is the story of my dad, my stepdad.
Yeah.
At least that's what's pushed forward the hardest. So I started writing outlines of a few, because there were several that were kind of battling in my mind of what do I want to do next. And so I wrote out some little bits, and it was the one that I keep coming back to. So it's going to be very difficult, because I'm looking at doing something interesting with voice and point of view.
Yeah, a creative challenge. Yeah,
just probably also why I'm gearing towards that as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Exciting. This is another, evolution for me. I've never done it.
Oh, well. I'm glad that we could be your first.
Thank you.
And for listeners, all the information for where you can find Michelle's book will be in the show notes, so check it out. I will very transparently say I always worry about reading books of people that I know.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh, what if
I don't like it?
Yeah. Or what if it sounds like, all of the things that go through your head. And I quite honestly could not put it down. Yeah. It was a really beautiful read. And I am grateful to you for letting that story out into the world.
Thank you.
Thank you for being part of the Transforming 45 community. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more juicy episodes, and remember to keep showing up to your life with the love and magic you deserve. Until next time.